We continue now at the top of Daf Tezvavam at Aleph Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 15a. On the previous summit, the Gemara brought a statement from Rabbi Yochanan that holacha shelo beregel, if one conveys the blood to the mizbeach without walking, so that's not called holacha, and therefore it would be possible, it would be disqualified. And the Gemara now continues and asks, Efshar l'tikuna, is it possible to fix such a situation? Olo efshar l'tikuna, or is it not possible to fix such a situation? Is there no solution? Rashi explains, Efshar l'takna means to say as follows. Bein sha'asa zar, whether we're talking about when a non-Kohen did the holacha, Bein sha'asa Kohen, or whether the Kohen did the holacha, it doesn't make a difference. Amrinan de'ein holacha, we said that it's not considered a good holacha, upsula, and therefore it's disqualified. The hanasis shelo kehilchasa, was not done properly. And so the question is, miu, nevertheless, yesh la takana lahachazira la'achoreh, is there a solution to return it back to its original place, v'lachzor laholich beregel, and then go convey it, take it by walking? Oein la takana, or is there no solution? That's the question of the Gemara. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, a proof, this is from the Mishnah later on, that we brought also in the previous Amud, Kibel HaKosher, let's say the person who receives the blood is a Kohen who's kosher, V'nosan L'Pasal, and then he gives it over to someone who is disqualified, a Kohen that's disqualified, so Yachzir L'Kosher, so then it should be returned to the Kohen who's kosher. So it sounds like from the Mishnah that you can go back. And the Gemara continues, Unihi Nami, now even if you're granted, even if you say the Yachzir HaKosher V'Yikablenu, that it doesn't mean that you go back to the original starting place to start over the holacha, but it simply means that the kosher kohen, we mentioned this on the previous Amud, can actually stand closer to the mizbeach and take it from the puzzle as if the puzzle is just a bench. But still, but if you think, if it should enter your mind that it's impossible to fix such a situation, so if so then it should be completely disqualified. There should be no opportunity to go forward and solve the situation. And Rashi explains, Yachzir l'kosher, you return it to a kohen who's kosher, Alma efshar l'takna, you see that it's possible to fix the situation. Unhinami, and granted, Kolomar, what the Gemara means to say is as follows. Vinami mifareshes law, even if you explain it to the kosher rishon, that kohen who was kosher at first, sheyolech letzad ha-mizbeach kamar, that he's actually going to go a little closer to the mizbeach and take it from the puzzle. The kol shekein, the shamat, the holeches kosher kama, the havoy shelo beregel ksheri, and then for sure, because then you understand from this Mishnah that when the original kosher handed it over to the person who was puzzled, that was a holacha shelo beregel, then you'd understand that that's actually kosher. But nevertheless, at the very least, we see that there is a solution in this situation. And the Shinuye Nuschos explains, V'ratzalomer, what it means to say is, the lomi boy, we don't even need to say, Inema de perish de masnis and yachzer lekosher hainu kosher basra. If the explanation of the Mishnah is that you're going to hand it forward to another kosher kohen who's closer to the mizbeach, and that would mean that when that first kosher kohen handed it over to the puzzle, even though that was a holacha shelo beregel, it actually is kosher. The pshita, the kosher afbelotak on it. Then it's obvious, because then we're saying holacha shelo beregel is kosher even without any solution. You don't need a takana. But even if you're going to say the yachzer lekosher, that returning to a kosher means hainu kosher kama, that's the first kohen who was a kohen kosher, and you have to go back and start over. Mikol makom shma minon. Nevertheless, we see the ksher al yedei takana, that it is kosher with a solution. And the Gemara continues and answers, you can't bring a proof from this Mishnah, because misavrit, do you think the koi zar gavoy, that the non-kohen is standing closer to the mizbeach? Lo, no, that's not the situation. The koi zar beroy, the case over here is the non-kohen is standing on the outside, meaning further away from the mizbeach. And Rashi explains, misavrit the koi zar gavoy letzad ha-mizbeach, do you think the non-kohen is standing on the inside, meaning to say towards the mizbeach? Shehikriv harishon behoshataso letzad ha-mizbeach, that what happened is that the kohen kosher handed it over to the zar, to the non-kohen, towards the mizbeach. In that case, it would actually be a holacha shelo beregel. But that's not what was happening over here. Rather, the koi zar baroy. Rather, what's happening is the non-kohen is further away from the mizbeach. The kosher shoshita lo, and the kohen kosher who handed it over to the non-kohen, to the apostle, hirchika min hamizbeach. He actually distanced it from the mizbeach. Hilkach lav holacha havoy lifso. Therefore, it's not considered a holacha at all, and it doesn't disqualify. That's actually what's happening. V'chi pashtinan, and therefore, when the Mishnah says yachzer kosher v'yitlenu, that the kosher should go and take it, v'zar ma'isa itztava hu diavad, and the zar just becomes like a bench. Teleka hoshat asiyat hamakarvaso lemizbeach. There was no situation where anyone stretched out their hand and brought it closer to the mizbeach, so you never really had a holacha shelo beregel to disqualify in that Mishnah, and therefore it would not prove in a situation where you actually did have a holacha shelo beregel which disqualified, whether there is a solution or not. And the Gemara continues, Itmar, it was stated, Amar Ula, Amar Reb Yochanan. Ula says that Reb Yochanan says, Holacha shelo beregel psula. If a person conveys the blood without walking, it is disqualified. This is the same Ula from Reb Yochanan as the previous Amud, but Ula from Reb Yochanan, the previous Amud, said Holacha shelo beregel is not called Holacha. Here the way it's phrased is Holacha shelo beregel psula, and so the Gemara says from that, Alma, we see lo efshel l'tikun, it's not possible to fix the situation. And Rashi says psula, it's possible, va'afilu asa kohen poselas adam, even if a Kohen does it, it will disqualify the blood, and there's no solution. V'yahid psachim, in the case in psachim we brought in the previous summit, that was the case where the Kohanim all stood in a row and they handed the blood one to the next. That was holacha, apparently, shelo beregel, so how did that work? And so Rashi says, b'denaidi, it's going to be that they were all moving a little, they were shuffling a little, uchid shaninan, as we answered on the previous summit. And the Gemara continues, Eitzvei Rav Nachman le'ula, Rav Nachman asks Ula the following question, this is from the Mishnah later on, Nishbach min hakli ala ritzba, let's say the blood spills out from the vessel onto the floor, v'asafo, and it's gathered up, so kosher, so it's still kosher. And Rashi explains, Nishbach min hakli ala ritzba v'asafo kosher hoel v'niskabel b'kli, since it was received in a vessel. Mishnah hi beperak shlishi b'chol hapsulam, this is a Mishnah later on, kasal kadaitach kishenishbach v'nispashit b'ritzba, niskarev l'tzanav mizbech. Now right now we think that the explanation of this Mishnah is that when it spilled out onto the floor, it actually got closer to the mizbeach, so it was really a holacha shelo beregel. V'katani kosher, and it says it's kosher when you pick it all up. Unehinami damer tetzarech lachzir lachorav, and even if you're going to say you have to bring it back to its original starting point, v'lachzor laholich beregel, and then walk it over in the normal fashion, mikol makom b'takanta sagila. But apparently there is a solution over here. You see from this Mishnah, there is a solution by collecting the blood again and then walking it over to the mizbeach. And the Gemara continues and answers, hacha b'mayaskin, and here what is the case? Kishayotza lechutz. The case over here is that it went towards the outside when it spilled, and it actually did not spill closer to the mizbeach. Kishayotza lechutz, Rashi says, kishanishbach, when it spilled, lo nispashil etzara mizbeach, it didn't spread out towards the mizbeach, el nispashil lehalon min ha-mizbeach v'nisrachik, rather it distanced, it spilled away from the mizbeach. But the Gemara continues and asks, Livroi nafik legavoy lo ayil, but do you think it's going to go towards the outside, meaning away from the Mizbeach, and not towards the inside, not towards the Mizbeach? That does not seem very likely. Rashi explains, Uparchinan livroi nafik legavoy lo ayil, bitmia, this is a question, V'chi efshel ledam tzolol, sheyishpech v'lo yispashel l'chol tzadin, is it possible when you have blood that easily flows, that it's going to spill out, and it's not going to spread in all directions? How can that be the case? And the Gemara continues and answers, there are a number of ways that can be possible. Number one, b'makom madron, it could be an area that's slanted, so it's all going to go in one direction. Iba yisema beguma, or you could say that there is a crevice, there's like a hole in the floor where it all collects over there, it doesn't flow in any direction. Viba yisema bismicha, and finally, if you want, I could say that we're talking about thick blood, which is not going to spread in all directions. Rashi explains, b'makom madron u'meshupa chutz l'mizbeach, it's slanted away from the mizbeach is one possibility. Beguma, there's a hole, sha'omid b'makom, it just stays in its place. V'lo nispashit, it doesn't spread at all. Inami b'smicha dam of, it's like a thicker blood, v'karav l'karish, it's nearly congealed, and then it will not spread. But the Gemara continues and asks, V'ichbil tana la'ashminan kolhani, is the Tana of the Mishnah going to teach us this halacha in such a restrictive cases? It has to be specifically in a slanted area or in a guma, or when it's talking about thicker blood. The Tana of the Mishnah is not talking just about the simple, straightforward scenario. V'yoden further, Adatani be'idach pirkin, we learn in the other parak, Nishbach ala ritzba, this is talking where the blood spills on the floor but was never collected in a vessel, V'asafo, and then it's gathered up, so pasul. So in that case, the Mishnah says it's disqualified. But why teach that case? Liflog bididei, you could actually just teach a distinction within the case itself. Meaning, in the case where it was collected in a vessel, you should say, Bamed devar mamurim, when do we say that you can pick it up off the floor? Kishayatza lachutz, that's only when it's spread toward the outside. Avol nichnas lifnim, but if it's spread toward the inside, toward the mizbeach, pasul, so then it would be disqualified. That's what the Mishnah should have said if that was the case. And so the Gemara says, to Yufta, actually it is a refutation, meaning the simple explanation of that Mishnah is that it spread towards the mizbeach, and still there is a solution. And Rashi explains, Be'idach pirkin, in the other parak, that's Beparak Sheni, that's a Mishnah in the second parak, Nishbach ala ritzba, so in that case the blood spilled on the floor, Mitzav or behema, from the neck of the animal, Velonis gavel bekli, was never received in a vessel. So again, Liflog b'didei, you should have just made a distinction within the Mishnah in the third parak. Be'ahid the parak shlishi da'iri b'kabolas kli, in the case in the third parak where it was received in a vessel, Niflog b'chilik, we should say the following distinction, Lifsol, we should say sometimes it's puzzle. Shepa Lepamim af min hakli l'ritzpa pasal. Sometimes even from the vessel to the floor, it is disqualified. Again, if it already spread towards the mizbeach because of holacha shelo beregel. Elami delo eshkach pasal elami tzaver behema. But from the fact that the Mishnah only says it's disqualified when it comes from the neck of the animal to the floor, shema minon nishbach min hakli. You see that if it spills from the vessel, loshna nafak livra. It doesn't matter if it spread toward the outside. Veloshna ayla gava. It doesn't matter if it spread toward the inside, toward the mizbeach. Kosher, it will be kosher. And so the Gemara therefore said to Yufta de Ula, this is a refutation of Ula, again, who brought that statement from Rabbi Yochanan. And the Gemara continues, Itmar, it was stated, Holacha shelo beregel, conveying the blood without walking. Machlokas Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan is actually Machlokas Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan in our Mishnah. And the Gemara explains, Beholacha Rabbasi, with large walking, so to speak, we'll see Rashi in a moment, Tekuli alma lo pligi de pasla, everybody agrees that in that case it's disqualified. Ki pligi, when is there a Machlokas in the Mishnah between Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan? Beholacha zutrasi, it's talking about by a small walking. And Rashi explains, Machlokis Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan, it's a Machlokis between Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan, the Masnisini, we're talking about the Machlokis Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan in our Mishnah. Ihavi avoda ilo, is it an avoda or not? Again, the Rabbi Shimon, according to Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah, lo havi avoda. What Rabbi Shimon said in our Mishnah is that holacha is not really an avoda, and that's why if you have a disqualifying machshava, a disqualifying intent while doing the holacha, Rabbi Shimon said that the carbon is still kosher. The Hakatani Masnisin, because again it said in the Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon machshir behilach. Rabbi Shimon says that by the holach it's kosher. The lo pasal b'machshava, that a wrong machshava will not disqualify by holacha. That's what Rabbi Shimon said. And now our Gemara is saying b'holacha shelo beregel. Rabbi Shimon was talking specifically about holacha, conveying it without walking. Umishum delav holacha, because Rabbi Shimon holds that's not really called holacha. In other words, since Rabbi Shimon holds that it's not called a holacha when you convey the blood without walking, so therefore if you have a disqualifying intent during that holacha, which is not really called a holacha, it will not disqualify, it will not passel the carbon. And the Gemara continued and said, B'holacha rabbasi, everybody agrees by a large holacha, maskana hi lemilse, this is just a conclusion of the words of the Gemara. To come a farish v'yomer, the Gemara is saying, Techi pligi Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan, when is there a machlokas in the Mishnah about whether a disqualifying intention during holacha disqualifies the carbon or not? Where is that machlokas? B'holacha zutrasa pligi. They're arguing by a small walking, meaning, sheshachat b'tzad ha-mizbeach, he simply slaughtered it right next to the mizbeach, v'zarak, and he threw the blood. Dahainu shelo beregel, meaning he conveyed it without walking. Aval b'holacha rabbasi, but let's say he really did have to walk. He was far away from the mizbeach, he had to take it over there. Dahainu beregel, that's with the feet. Lo pligi, there'd be no machlokas, that certainly is a holacha, and therefore if you have a machshava psula in that situation, it will disqualify. Now Rashi notes, ulakamon mosiv lami masnisin. Now the Gemara later on will ask on this from the Mishnah itself. The shamina mina, because we see from the words of the Mishnah itself, that even if you slaughter far away from the mizbeach, machshir Rabbi Shimon says kosher. Mida katani, because what does it say in the Mishnah? It says shemurotza shochet b'tzad mizbeach v'zora, because if he wanted to, he can slaughter next to the mizbeach and throw. That would imply that we're talking even when he did not slaughter right next to the mizbeach. And the Gemara continues, Mechku Allah b'ma'arav, in the West, they laughed at this explanation of our Mishnah, because Ela chatas of, because according to that, what about chatas of, a bird chatas, dipsula b'machshava, there we say that if you have a wrong intent, it does disqualify. So l'Rabbi Shimon, hechi mashkach hasla, according to Rabbi Shimon, how is it that you're going to find such a situation, such a case? Idachashav Allah, if the person has the wrong intent, mekame delepak dam, before the blood comes out, lo klum, that's nothing. V'ibazar denafik dam, and if it's after the blood came out, is avidale mitzvah, so then the mitzvah is already finished. And Rashi explains, Mechku aleh b'ma'arava, they laughed at this in the West. Mechaychu aleh d'hai shmaita d'muki taimed Rabbi Shimon b'holacha zutrasa, saying that the reasoning of Rabbi Shimon is because we're talking about a holacha zutrasa where you're conveying without walking. Ulamemar delav holachi, and what Rabbi Shimon was saying is that's not considered holacha. V'yafal pishi yefsha levatla lazu, even though it's impossible to avoid doing this, lav avodahi, but it's still not considered an avoda because you're not walking. They laughed at that idea because alachatas of, because by the bird chatas, tekaimulan beperakot because we've established later on in Parakot Shekachim, the pasal ba machshava, we know that if you have a wrong intention, that does disqualify. B'hazoas dama, when you sprinkle the blood of the bird chatos, shu ikar avodasa, that's the main avoda by the bird chatos. Techsiv sham v'hiza midam hachatos el kir. It says over there in the pasuk that they're going to sprinkle from the blood of the chatos on the wall of the mizbeach. Sha'ochza begufa, what they would do is the Kohen would hold the body of the bird, umat is dama lekir, and then he would spray the blood towards the wall of the the Mizbeach. V'hacha hataza, and this spraying of the blood, holacha zutrasi, that actually is a holacha zutrasi. That's like conveying the blood without walking. V'kevan, the time of the Rabbi Shimon mishum de holacha zutra lo pasal b'machshava. Now, if Rabbi Shimon holds that a small walking, the machshava does not disqualify, so heichal pasal b'hach, how does it disqualify in this situation? And Rashi continues, if he's having this wrong intention before the blood comes out of the neck, that's during the time when he's moving the bird up and down, so we say that's nothing, the holacha zutrasi, that's just called holacha zutrasi. And if it's after the blood already came out of the neck, and that's what you're going to say is the time when he has the wrong machshava, that's when he has that wrong intent, then the mitzvah is complete. And Rashi explains the kasal kadaitach. Right now we think once the blood exits the neck, so that avoda of the sprinkling of the blood is finished. Right now we think even though the blood didn't yet reach the mizbeach, but still that avoda is over. And Rashi explains, the Amr Bishlama Beholacha Rabbasi Pligin. Now, if you said correctly that the machlokas between Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan in the Mishnah was by a regular conveying when the person is walking, the time of Rabbi Shimon Mishum de Efshel Levatlu, and the reason of Rabbi Shimon is because it's possible not to do that if you would slaughter right next to the Mizbeach. So Hadachatas Efshel Levatlu, then you would simply say that by the Chatas Ha'of, by the bird Chatas, it's impossible to avoid. You're going to have to move that bird up and down in order to sprinkle the blood, and so therefore it would be a critical avoda, and a bad machshava would disqualify. If you're going to say that the reason is because it's not a holach if you're not walking, they're arguing in a situation again when you're conveying without walking. So why would it be disqualified? How is it disqualified in this case? The wrong machshava is only taking place by the conveying without walking. And Rashi notes, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who said earlier, he seemed to say the same thing. He said that holacha shelo b'regel is not a holacha, v'lo pasal b'machshava, and therefore a wrong intention doesn't disqualify. So why just ask on this version of Rabbi Shimon? You could have asked this question on Rabbi Yochanan. Rashi says, you couldn't ask from here, from Chatas Ha'of. Rabbi Yochanan b'holacha rabbasi kamer, because when Rabbi Yochanan said that holacha shelo b'regel is not a holacha, that was when you were far away and really the normal way would have been to walk, and instead you do it in some other fashion without walking. Shein darka b'kach, that's not the normal way to do it, so he said that's not called a holacha. Aval hashochet b'tzad mizbeach, but Rabbi Yochanan would actually agree that if you slaughter right next to the mizbeach and then you convey without walking, which is the normal way to do it right next to the mizbeach, v'chein chatas ha'of shenimlekas etzel ha'mizbeach, and also by the chatas ha'of where the malika of the neck is right by the mizbeach, Ikar holachasa bekach, that's the normal holacha. Umoda bar Rabbi Yochanan would admit over there, and that's why this was not a question on Rabbi Yochanan. But the Gemara continues, my kusha, what's the difficulty? Dilma mi deparish dama vi'ad demotel mizbeach. Maybe the person has the wrong intention from the time that the blood leaves the neck of the bird until it reaches the mizbeach, and at that point in time that would be considered part of the avoda, that's part of the avoda of the application of the blood, and therefore a machshava psula, if you'd have a wrong intention, it would disqualify. And Rashi explains, Umay Kushi, what's the difficulty? Dilma mi deparish dam. Maybe from the time that the blood leaves the neck of the bird, the pasak laholacha, at that point in time, there's no longer a holacha. That's not considered the conveying of the blood. That's considered already the throwing, the application of the blood. Mitchilas hazah, maschelas hazah, that's when the hazah begins. V'yeshna lahazah adamati lemizbeach, and the process of the hazah, it doesn't end the moment that the blood leaves the neck. It continues until the blood actually reaches the mizbeach. And therefore the wrong intention will be able to be chal at that point in time. And the Gemara continues, because Rabbi Yirmiyah asked Rabbi Zera the following question, if the Kohen is sprinkling the blood, v'nikta yado shel mazeh, and then the hand of the one sprinkling the blood, the hand of the Kohen is cut off, he becomes a balmum, and this happens before the blood actually reaches the mizbeach itself, the airspace of the mizbeach. Mahu, what would be the halacha? V'amar said to him, psula, that's a disqualification. My time, what's the reason? Vihiza v'nasan bo'in, it has to fulfill the pasuk which says Vihiza v'nasan. And Rashi explains, Dehaboy minei hayamaza bechatas ha'of o bechatos ha'pnimios. This could be by the chatas ha'of, the bird chatos, or it could be by the inner chatos. Mahu, what's the halacha? Mihave avoda bebal mum psula. Is it considered that a bal mum did the avoda, that a person, a Kohen with a blemish did the avoda and it's disqualified? Oh, low or not? The ikol amemer, because one could say, Michi parish dam gamrala, from the moment the blood leaves the animal, that's the end of the zrikas hadam, or the application of the blood. And so that's the whole question over here. Again, while the blood is still in the air going to the mizbeach, is that still the time of the avoda or not? V'yamar leini said to him, psula, it is disqualified. My time, what's the reason? Vihiza, because again the pasuk says vihiza v'nasan, dechatos ha'of o dechatos ha'pnimios. This applies by both the bird chatos and the inner chatos. Dechsib bohen hazah, it says the word hazah over there, it says vihiza, and then it says v'nasan, it also says that you're going to apply. Ba'inon hazah dumya de nasan, the hazah needs to be similar to nasan. The gabe hadad iksivi, because they're written next to each other. Vihiza min hadam, it says he's gonna sprinkle from the blood. V'nasan hakoyin min hadam al karnos, and it says he's going to place the blood on the corners. Alma yeshna lahazah ad sheyagil mizbech. You see that it's still the process of the hazah until it actually reaches the mizbeach. And so the Gemara continues, Kiyasu Rav Papa v'Rav Huna b'Reider Rav Yoshua mi Bei Rav. When Rav Papa and Rav Huna b'Reider Rav Yoshua came from the yeshiva of Rav, Amri, they said, Hainu chocha, the reason for the laughter in terms of the explanation of the machlokas between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah is as follows. Uvaholacha Rabbasi lo pligi, do you really think that Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan are not arguing by holacha Rabbasi, by a case, again, a regular case of walking the blood over to the Mizbeach? V'haki pligi b'holacha Rabbasi pligi, but it's clear from the words of the Mishnah that they're arguing by holacha Rabbasi. Ella, rather, you have to say b'holacha zutrasi, that if it's holacha zutrasi, meaning again, if the Kohen is right next to the Mizbeach, and therefore he can convey the blood without walking, Kuli Alma Lo Pligi, there's no machlokas, and the Bach changes the girsa to the pasla. Everybody agrees that in that case, it does disqualify, meaning in that situation, it certainly is considered to be a holacha, because that's something that has to be done. That is a holacha that must be done, and so therefore it's significant. If you have the wrong machshava during that holacha, it will in fact disqualify. Ki Pligi, when do they argue? B'holacha Rabbasi, the whole machlokas in the Mishnah is by holacha Rabbasi, in a situation where he could have slaughtered the animal near the Mizbeach, but he didn't, and so now he has to walk the blood over to the Mizbeach. That's where there's a machlokas in the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon says, since that's technically not absolutely necessary, because he could have slaughtered the animal right by the Mizbeach, therefore it's not considered a holacha, and the bad machshava during that holacha would not disqualify. And Rashi explains, Hainu chocha, this is the explanation of the laughter, hadamechku b'ma'arava, the reason why they laughed in the west, mishum dekashalu hachi, they had the following question, uvaholacha Rabbasi lo pligi vaki pligi. It's clear in the Mishnah they're arguing by holacha Rabbasi. Dehadakatani efshar shalo behilach, because it says again, it's possible that you don't have to walk. That's the whole logic. Shma mina b'dehilach askinan. You see that we're talking where the Kohen did walk the blood, he did convey it by walking over to the Mizbeach. V'taim mishum she'efshar levatlo, and the whole reason is, the reason why Rabbi Shimon says kosher is because that is an avodah that you really could have gotten rid of. V'hamiyah lo bitel, but he didn't actually get rid of it, and so therefore that's why Rabbi Shimon says in such a situation, since in theory you could have gotten rid of that avodah, you didn't have to do it if you slaughtered the animal right by the Mizbeach. That's why he says it's not considered an avodah. The holacha Rabbasi is not considered an avodah. Ela b'holacha zotrasi kuli amalo pligi depsula garsin. And Rashi says the proper text is that by holacha zotrasi everybody says that it's disqualified. The reason is because that's impossible to nullify. It's impossible to avoid doing holacha zotrasi, and that's why everybody agrees there a bad machshava will disqualify. The whole question is again by holacha Rabbasi. And Rashi continues and notes, Uman degaris de lo pasla, the one who has the text in the Gemara of lo pasla by holacha zotrasi, we can explain that as follows: Taima mishum delav klumi. The idea would be that holacha is nothing. Ve'in shem holacha. It's not even called holacha when all you're doing is reaching with your hand over to the mizbeach. Ela kulot sorech zrika. It would all be considered part of zrika. V'lo have bedaite lemechshav azrika. But if the person, when he has the wrong intention, is not thinking about zrika, ela holacha, he's thinking about holacha v'lo chashav midi. Therefore, it's not considered anything, and that's why it would not disqualify. Again, according to those who have that text. And Rashi continues, upsul de chatas ha'of. Now, what about the fact that by chatas ha'of we say it is disqualified? Again, there the person is right next to the mizbeach, and he's spraying from the neck of the bird to the mizbeach. So there, keduki, that's as we established before. Midaparish v'yad dematal mizbeach. There, the bad machshav is happening from the moment the blood leaves until it reaches the mizbeach. Umishum machshavas hazah, and there he's having a machshava regarding hazah. He's thinking about the fact that he's sprinkling the blood. V'lo mishum machshavas holach. It's not that he's having an intention in terms of conveying the blood, and therefore, again, that's how you can explain that girsa, and also explain why it's possible by chatas ha'of. And the Gemara continues, Holicho zar v'hechziro kohen v'chazer v'holicho. Let's say a non-kohen, he does the holacha, and then a kohen takes it back to the original spot, and then he does the holacha. So pligi ba b'nei Rabbi Chia v'Rabbi Yanai. That's a machlokus between the sons of Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yanai. Chad amar kosher, one says kosher, v'chad amar pasul, and one says it's disqualified. Mar savar efshel tikuna, one says a solution is possible. Umar savar lo efshel tikuna. The other one says that a solution is not possible. Holicho kohen v'hechziro v'chazer v'holicho zar. Now what happens if you have the reverse? The kohen does the holacha, but then it's returned, and then the zar does the holacha. Amar Rav Shimi bar Ashi. Rav Shimi bar Ashi says, l'divrei hamachshir, according to the one who said kosher in the first case, so pasul, so it'll actually be disqualified in this case, because if you say kosher in the first case, where the kohen does the second holacha, it means the second holacha is primary. And so if the zar does the second holacha, again, that's primary, it will be pasul. And l'divrei haposel, according to the one who says that the second holacha done by the kohen is not kosher, that means the first holacha is primary. So then machshir, so then it will be kosher in this case, where the first holacha was the kohen, and will ignore the holacha of the zar. And the Gemara continues with another opinion. Rava Amar Rava says, Af l'divrei haposel, even according to the one who disqualifies when the kohen is the one who does the second holacha, pasul, it will also be disqualified when the zar does the second holacha. My time, what's the reason? Dot sarich, because that holacha is necessary. And Rashi explains, holicho zar, if a non-kohen does the holacha beregel, that's talking about walking it in the regular fashion, conveying it with the feet. V'echziro kohen, and then the kohen returns it, shu avoda olav muteles, because he's the one that's supposed to do the avoda. V'chazer v'holicho, and then he does the holacha kosher, it's kosher. And Rashi notes, v'hada tanya le'el, now that which we learned in the brisa earlier, zar v'onen b'holacha pasul, that if a non-kohen or an onen does the holacha, then it's pasul, kishalahuchzer, that's if it wasn't returned. In other words, there is a solution where you just have to bring it back to the original starting point and do the holacha properly. Efshel l'tikun, again, it's possible to fix it. L'holecha is pasul. If a disqualified person does the holacha, you can fix it. V'lo damya l'shar avodos. It's not similar to other avodos. Te'ilu shchita v'kabola v'zrika, when it comes to slaughtering, receiving the blood, throwing the blood. Ma'achar shenasu b'psul, once they're done in a disqualified manner, efshel lachzer v'lasos b'echsher, you can't go back and do it in a kosher fashion. But holacha you can do again. V'yim tomer, now if you're going to ask, kabola nami yesh l'sakin, the receiving of the blood you can fix. Kagon shelo kibel hapasul kol hadam, let's say the person who's disqualified didn't receive all of the blood, v'yachol kosher lachzer l'kabel hahi v'ulakabel, and then the kosher person can go and receive whatever other blood is coming. So ahi v'adai ksheira, Rashi says that actually is certainly kosher. Uveperak shlishi tananla, there we learned that in the Mishnah in the third parak, im yesh dam hanefesh yachzer hakosher v'yakabel, if there is still dam, so then the kosher person can receive, v'chein bezrika, and that would be true by the zrika as well. Hachi garsin, on the proper text is, holicho kohen v'hechziro v'chazro v'holicho zar, the kohen does the holacha and then the zar. Amar Rav Shimi l'divrei hamachshir b'holicho zar v'hechziro kohen, according to the one who says that if the kohen does the second holacha, that it's kosher, v'chazro v'holicho, again, the kohen does the second holacha, it's kosher, so then posel, so then in this case where the zar does the second holacha, it's pasul. Kevan dahasel my time a machshir, because why was it kosher over there? Dahasel basar basraisa, we follow the later holacha. Hachanami zil basar basraisa, here also you follow the later holacha. L'divrei haposel, according to the one who says it's disqualified, the azal basar holacha kamaisa, meaning when the kohen does the second holacha, it's bad because we follow the first holacha, machshir, so then it would be kosher over here. Kevan the azal basar kamaisa, because we follow the first one, which was the kohen. And then Rava said, af l'divrei haposel, sham posel kan, even if you say it's pasul over there where the kohen does the second one, it's also pasul where the zar does the second one. Because the zar has to do it. Because if you already brought the blood all the way back, you have to start over. Someone's going to need to do that second holacha. You're going to now need to bring it back to the mizbeach. If you did a holacha rishona, the kohen brought it to the mizbeach, and then someone brought it all the way back to the starting point, now that second holacha is necessary. Nimsa the holacha achrona letzorech kechol haolachos. It comes out that latter holacha is needed, like all other holachos, and therefore it would be disqualified there as well. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tezvav Amid Beis.